of the non-aligned movement. And they were also, they bought most of their weapons from Russia. So we didn't really see them as being non-aligned. We saw them as being part of the Russia sphere of influence. And as a leader of the non-aligned, at the time we were pushing for trade liberalization throughout the world. And India was always trying to protect its rather inefficient farmers. So they were always opposed to it, and they would just, because they're very intelligent, and they were very adept at pushing the various buttons and pulling the levers at the UN to block us from things that we wanted to do. Things with India got worse in 1998 when they set off a nuclear test. At the time, and it's still today, we have a policy opposed to nuclear proliferation. And we impose sanctions on countries that are not supposed to have nuclear weapons, but set off nuclear tests. And so we imposed sanctions on India. And I think, as you saw in the video, one of the turning points came with Clinton's visit in 2000, just before he left office. There was a lot of people in Washington who were beginning to say to themselves, gee, why are we imposing sanctions on India when we should be worried, number one, about the pressure of China in Asia? And India is obviously the largest bulwark to China's advancement in Asia. So because of that thinking in Asia, Washington, we started trying to reach agreement with India. And India actually was seeing things the same way. They realized that they needed a strong ally if they were going to stand up to China. So in 2005, when George Bush was president, we put aside our concerns about nuclear proliferation, and we reached an agreement with India that to try to cooperate in the nuclear peaceful field. And then we also started selling them a lot of weapons. They turned to us as their main weapons supplier. There's Iqbal. Welcome, Iqbal. I guess you're still muted, but anyway, Iqbal, I was just giving a little introduction. So, but you'll notice from having looked at the video, if you looked at it, although the topic here is India and Pakistan, the video is all about India and China. And that's really what the name of the game is. And Pakistan enters into this only on the side. And as you saw in the video, the main reason that India is friends with Pakistan is because Pakistan manages to tie down some 500,000 troops of India on the border, and therefore they're not available to confront China. So those two are friends. And we have, this has all become, it's very interesting to look at all these relationships and the changing relationships. It's almost like a 21st century version of the 19th century Great Game, when these various countries were all trying to make friends with each other. So anyway, that's the background on India. And then when Trump came in, India took a look at Trump and said, you know, this may not be so bad for us. Number one, this guy's not going to pressure us so much on climate change because they have all those coal burning electric generators. And he's not going to be so active with troops abroad, which India favors. But anyway, so they looked at that side of him, but also they looked at the side of him. And so in terms of having the US as an ally, they looked at the side of Trump and saw that he was making noises about not being a good ally in NATO. When he was dealing with North Korea, he didn't consult with the South Koreans. When he was dealing with trying to make peace in Afghanistan, he didn't deal with when he's trying to make peace in Afghanistan, he didn't deal with the Pakistanis. So India saw that he's not a very reliable partner. So they have now started reaching out again a bit to Russia, and maybe trying to be not so confrontational with China. But anyway, so that's where India kind of stands at present. Pakistan, as you will have seen in the readings, is a country which is essentially run by the military. There hasn't been a single prime minister elected in Pakistan who has finished the office without being thrown out by the military. The current prime minister doesn't come from either the long-serving Bhutto clan or the Nawaz clan, which have been producing most of the prime ministers since independence. And he was somebody, Imran Khan, who was a cricket star who was supported by the military. And they are trying to be friendly for all sides with China and with the U.S. And the U.S. is trying to be friendly with them because we hope that they can use their influence on the Taliban to help us get out of Afghanistan by having the Taliban not be quite so confrontational. So everybody's trying to play with everybody else in the region. And on just one other thing on Pakistan, Trump got so mad at them that for all these, we're not helping us enough in Afghanistan, that he cut off aid to Pakistan. So that has made Pakistan wary of the U.S., and Pakistan is now itself also looking out at what other kind of allies they might find, such as Russia. So that's a little bit of an introduction to the region. I won't go into more of the details because Iqbal knows much more than I do. And well, at this point, I'll turn it over to you. And I just kind of covered the big picture, from the times when India was not aligned up to now, and you can tell us what's going on now.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much, Kirk. And you asked me to give a little bit of introduction about myself. You want me to do that, or you did it already?
I think that'd be great.
Okay, so basically, I think I know a lot of people. I see the faces, so you know me. But just people who don't know me, my name is Iqbal Mamdami. I was born in Tanzania in East Africa. My grandfather came to Africa in 1910. I was educated in Africa, and after I finished that, I went to university in Japan, got my undergraduate degree. I then came to this country, went to University of California, Berkeley, and then I went back to Africa. I came back again in 1970. I joined American Express Bank, and through various channels, I was made the head of the Middle East in 1975, and I went to Middle East and have lived there for about 35 years. I left American Express, started my own bank, and so my involvement with India has really been because I was the first one when India opened up to start an investment bank and a brokerage company in India. And I have been, and then since I sold my bank in 2007, I have been going there almost twice a year just for other business because I have an IT investment and so forth. So my observations are purely from the point of view of an investment banker and a businessman. So I'm not a politician, I'm not a State Department person like Kirk. So they are purely a layman's thing. So I wanted to talk about, as Kirk mentioned, there's not too much talk about the background in terms of India and Pakistan. They talk about India, but more not about Pakistan. So I said I'll just give you some indication of that, see how the political parties have evolved over the last 50 years, and especially what's happening with the economic situation in India and Pakistan, and the impact of COVID-19 pandemics. So the major event of the subcontinent was a partition in 1947. The British, who had colonized the continent for over 200 years, decided to withdraw and create two different states, a Hindu state in India and Muslim majority state in Pakistan. But the celebration for independence, which the Indian people have fought for over 100 years, was really very short-lived, because the partition resulted in almost 1 million people death. There were 12 million people dislocated and displaced. So this has been a profound tragedy, and the animosity that was created by this incident is still a source.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but could you get a little bit closer to the microphone? Because we can't hear you very well. Thank you.
Okay, hold on. Can you hear me better now?
I think it's a little better, yes.
Better?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So as I said, that the displaced people, 1 billion people killed, is proved to be a profound tragedy, and the animosity that is created has remained a major source of conflict up to this day. In retrospect, if you look back, the decision by the British Prime Minister then, Attlee, and the Viceroy, Lord Mountbatten, to negotiate a deal with the Indian leadership and leave by June 1948 was not a very realistic target and was not really well thought out. It was impossible to draw boundaries between two countries where members of the communities have lived side by side for centuries. Therefore, it was a hastily arranged borderline with no understanding of how the countries post-independence will be able to govern themselves. And in the case of Pakistan, the nation was divided by more than 1,200 miles between East and West Pakistan. On the other hand, the Indian leadership was also not united. There were two opposing leaders. We had Jawaharlal Nehru, which was the head of the Congress Party, and we had Mr. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was the head of the Muslim League. Now, they didn't see eye to eye with each other, and they didn't see how they were going to go after independence. Now, Gandhi worked very hard and tirelessly to see if they could bring these two leaders together. But unfortunately, the efforts failed. Now, Jinnah was also, I think, in a little bit influenced by Churchill, because Churchill persuaded Jinnah to pursue a policy of a separate Muslim state. Churchill had, of course, other consideration. He thought that a separate Muslim Pakistan state would be friendly to Britain and to the West, and will serve as a buffer against both the Soviet Union, and he thought that India would be socialist under Nehru. So over the years, India has really remained the largest democracy in the world. But as Kirk mentioned out, military men have governed Pakistan since the death of Jinnah in 1949. So even when there are elections held in Pakistan, democratically elected leadership is always at the mercy of the military and the intelligence services. In India, since independence, Congress Party has been the main political force. Nehru and Gandhi family dynasty, and this Gandhi is not to be mixed up with the Gandhi, who the founder and father of the nation, has controlled the government for over 50 years. The Congress Party grip from the power came in 2014 when BJP, under the leadership of Narendra Modi, came to power. BJP has further consolidated that power in the last year's election, 2019, when they won the majority, and the Congress Party and its affiliates are reduced to just 84 seats out of 543. So this has been the largest majority that a single political party had in India for a long, long time. So it meant that BJP now has a mandate to carry out with their major political and economic agenda. Just for information, the last Congress government was a coalition of 13 different parties. So you can see where BJP's political power is right now. So BJP and Modi, since coming to power, has challenged the secular nature of the Indian Constitution. And over the past years, have continuously tried to erode the rights of all minority communities, but specifically and particularly the Muslim minority. There are 225 million Muslims living in India today, which is really the second largest population of Muslim population after Indonesia. So after the 2019 election victory, Modi government introduced two major legislation which had a big impact. One was revoking the Article 370, which you read in the book, which was the revoking the political rights of the people living in the Union territory of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, this was done by some legislative means, but mostly by military means. The military occupied the territories, cut it off all the communication with the outside world. Hundreds of people, including politicians, journalists, and business people, have been arrested, and many people have still disappeared. The second legislation deals with the Citizenship Act, which is the article number 35A. This deals with the citizenship and the property rights, mostly related to the Muslim minority. So it's clear that BJP is determined to change the secular nature of the country and make it a Hindu nation. Now, these policies of the BJP have met a lot of opposition, not only from the Muslim minority, but all sorts of people, because many people in India still want to keep the secular nature and the democratic nature of India. Now, these two things, besides having the domestic impact, it also has ruined the relationship with Pakistan. Even though Imran Khan does not want, because his economic situation is not so well right now, he does not want to create an accelerated tension between these two countries. As you recall, in February of 2019, India sent some fighter jets into Pakistan to destroy some military camps. Pakistani shot down the plane. Pakistan captured the pilot, and instead of keeping him there, he returned back to India to make sure that the climate does not accelerate in terms of hostilities. He further has now released the guy who was responsible for the Taj Hotel Mumbai incident in, I think it was 2015 or 16. So he's trying his best to make sure that the tension doesn't arise. But if the Indian government does not take some steps to create some sort of accommodation with the Muslim community in India, the hands of Khan are very much tied, because the military is very powerful, and they're not going to stand by and let these things go by. So I think the situation between these two countries are really very, very tense. Now, as you mentioned, Kirk, that as opposed to Modi, who is sort of comes from a very humble background, and he rose in his political career through this very ultra-nationalistic youth movement called RSS. Khan comes from, he was educated in Oxford. He was a great cricketer. He won the 1992 World Cricket against England. And he started his own political party and been trying for election, but finally was able to win election in 2018 and became the prime minister. Now, in economic terms, compared to Pakistan, India has done extremely well. It has been growing about 8 to 10% over the last 10 years, but the growth rate has slowed down. So there's a big challenge for the Modi government to do something before the next election. Now, what will happen with the COVID-19, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, how it is going to impact the growth rate is going to be very interesting. Now, if you look at the demographics of India, the population of India is 1.3 billion people. It will overtake China as the largest country in terms of population by 2030. India has roughly 500 million people who are just above the poverty line. It needs to create 10 million jobs every year. So it's a big challenge. Now, Pakistan growth rate has been very modest. We're growing at 5%, modest in terms of the subcontinent, but it was projected to grow at 2%. I think it'll be even less than that now, because we don't know how the COVID is going to end up. Now, Pakistan has serious debt issues. In addition, 25% of the population is below poverty line. So it's a miserable situation. Now, Pakistan, as you mentioned, has also a lot of debt payment to be made to China. So we'll see how it pans out, because the relationship between India and China and India and Pakistan are all correlated. They have the same border over there. So it's very interesting to see how this the recent border dispute between India and China is going to impact, and how Pakistan would be involved or not. So it's also very sort of complicated, but with the same sort of jigsaw puzzle that one has to work out. Now, as you know, our President Trump suggested that he would like to mediate the dispute between China and India, and of course both countries refused. They said it's okay, we're going to handle it bilaterally, we don't need any further assistance right now. Now, in terms of COVID-19 pandemics and the impact on the subcontinent, from the available sources, which are, as you know, not very reliable, but they said that reportedly there are 350,000 reported cases in India and 10,000 deaths. Now, these figures, 75% of these figures come from 5 states only, and there are 29 different states in India, as you know. And they've had only 5 million tests on a population base of 1.3 billion. It's a very small proportion. Now, when the lockdown was imposed in India, it was overnight without any more warning, and a significant numbers of people have been affected. At the last count, what they call in India so-called migrant workers, which are the people who migrate from one state to the other, their number is 180 million people. Now, these people have been homeless. There have been, no transportation for them for weeks. Now, what kind of, how are they impacted? How are the economic situation going to be? So you have 180 million plus people in India who are going to, we'll have to see how that is going to turn out. Now, according to independent sources, the growth rate of India is going to be negative 12.5%, which is really substantial in terms of the impact on the economy. Now, Pakistan's situation is even far worse. The number of confirmed cases, they say, is 160,000 and only 3,000 deaths. But this, I think it's very difficult to believe. Now, Pakistan has also 25% of its population, or 50 million people, are under poverty line. And there's a huge unemployment problem right now. And their medical facilities are even worse than India. Now, India spends only 0.1% of their GDP on the medical supplies and on health. So I think that Pakistan is now just estimated to have a negative growth rate of 15%. So now with no social welfare, they don't have economic safety nets, government have very limited resources, unlike us where we are putting trillions of dollars in the market. I think the situation in the subcontinent is going to be very dire. Now, what impact the economy would have on the political situation is something that remains to be seen. So I think with that, I sort of end up my introduction to the
we have Phyllis has raised her hand. Do you want to ask a question, Phyllis? No, she just wanted to she wanted to say hi. Okay. Yeah, turn it back to you, Kirk, then.
Well, I'll just, Iqbal, I'll ask you a question.
Sure.
So, I've read a little bit about the most recent skirmish on the border. And I gather what the New York Times today was reporting that in the past 2 months, China has taken 23 square miles or kilometers or something of the disputed area between India and China. And so it's looking, if that's true, it looks like the aggressor in some of this may be China. And I also, I've read elsewhere that also China is taking advantage of this period to be more aggressive in the South China Sea. But so how do you, if I think about this one way, and what is the interest of the United States in this? Well, number one, we don't want it to escalate. But number two, we certainly want to get all the support that we can in the subcontinent from India. And so how do you see this playing into that?
Well, okay, first of all, what I heard, Prime Minister Modi had a press conference yesterday about this dispute on the border, and he wanted to sort of calm down the whole situation. Now, you know, what I read, and I'm not quite sure about this, but what I understood was that in that particular area where there is this valley in the Himalayan mountains, is where they don't have any arms. So the people were killed, 20 soldiers and everything. It was not by gunshots, you know. They were sort of hand-to-hand battle, and you know they used other kind of without using lethal weapons, you know. So I'm not so sure how that is. Now China, on the other hand, do not also want to create a problem as far as India is concerned. You know, the border is 2,400 miles, it's a huge border, and the disputed area is very far up in the mountain, in the Himalayas. You know, if you see the border, you know, it's a long border with China. So first, that's my impression. So Modi doesn't want to really create the incident and take it further, because I think that economic situation in India is a disaster, and he would have to figure out a way of how he can maneuver out of this situation in a way that he focuses on the economic situation. And yet,
I read, Iqbal, that they don't expect the coronavirus to peak in India until the middle of August.
August, right?
I mean,
now, as I was telling you, 180 million people, plus you look at every other place, you know, there are a lot of other people who have a very problem. You look at the hospitals in Mumbai, and one of I had a discussion with one of my friends in India 2 days ago, and he said that the Delhi government said that the Delhi hospitals are not open to anybody else except people who live in Delhi. And there was such a huge, what I'll say, discussion on the television and media in India that's saying, listen, Delhi is the capital of India, and you can't say that people who live outside of Delhi cannot use the hospitals in Delhi. So there's a lot of issues going on like that. Secondly, the media, incidentally, are really hyping up this India-China border clash more than one would have thought. So even though Modi is trying to calm things down, the media is really pushing it up a lot in India. Now, you asked me a second question about U.S. involvement. I didn't get it.
How do you think this skirmish on the border plays into the what do you think about the strength of the partnership between India and the U.S. in the subcontinent?
Well, I think the Indian and U.S. partnership very transactional. We do not have a long-term view of what we really want to do. Same way, you know, I mean, look, we were friends with Pakistan for a very long period of time. You know, they helped us fight the first Afghan war, where we took out, you know, we helped Afghanistan, and Pakistan helped us to take out Russia from Afghanistan. We still, and so in terms of our position vis-a-vis Pakistan, we have, as you rightly said, we cut off the aid. We still need them, because if you want to have a lasting peace in Afghanistan, you cannot have Pakistan alienated in this process. So I think it's very important. In India, I think we are transactional. We have tried to, you know, I mean, Mr. Trump was there, you know, in India recently, just before at the beginning of the COVID crisis, and he said everything is going to disappear, nothing would happen. He had a large number of crowds in Gujarat, where Mr. Trump went. But I think that there is no deep-seated relationship, and I think the Modi government in India wants to be transactional as much as they can, because I don't think.
Excuse the interruption. I think Mr. Pettibone had a question.
I do, and hi, Iqbal, and
Hi.
what do you say about the Belt and Road Initiative? That do you view that as bringing Pakistan and China closer together, and will that make Pakistan much more a part of the Chinese world economy?
Well, you know, China has been involved in the development of not only the roads that it's building, but they're building a big port on Gwalior, you know, which is on the Gulf Coast. This will give access to China to be able to go through route all the way up to the Arabian Gulf. I mentioned it in terms of the foreign debt that Pakistan has. Much of the debt is to China. And either they have to renegotiate or they have to find a way of how they can settle this issue. You know, as I mentioned, Pakistan was able to get $6 billion from the World Bank recently, and they got a similar amount from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Other countries are reluctant to lend more money because they don't want this money to go and really repay the debt of China. Now, sooner or later, then China would have to reschedule this debt. But Pakistan is is really in a big debt, and they are very close to that. I mean, some of the, as you know, in terms of nuclear weapons and arms and everything, China and Pakistan are much closer. And they also look that in the long term, you know, they believe that, you know, there was a talk, I think, a couple of years ago where they were trying to have an axis between Washington, Delhi, and Tokyo. In order to make sure that the China is our biggest enemy right there, and we want to make sure that they're isolated, and be China and Japan and Washington, you know, that will be the axis that we can contain China. So China, therefore, is looking at that, and they say, okay, what is our axis? So they went to the south, you know, they were very strong in Sri Lanka. As you remember, they gave a lot of money there. They established base there. They actually created a big port, which was a big failure. It's a port out of nowhere. And they have now taken over that piece of land in Sri Lanka. And in Pakistan, they are even more and more. They're building roads, they're building railroads, they're building this big port, they've given, you know, industries and everything. So they are much more involved in Pakistan, and that is sort of the more geopolitical sense. You know, when Kirk mentioned earlier, it's part of still the big game, but it's played the other way around. It's the China which is now trying to see that how they win the big game, you know, as opposed to the European countries coming into Asia.
Do you see the possibility that the solution in Sri Lanka might well play itself out in Pakistan? That is to say, in the restructuring of the debt that Pakistan owes to China, China will in effect take possession of ports and railroads and the like in Pakistan.
Yeah, well, you know, in Sri Lanka, one of the biggest problem of when the China negotiated all this deal, you know, there's a lot of corruption. And so when the new government came in Sri Lanka, they decided that they're going to renege on the obligation. And because this negotiation went for a long time, and then decided that, okay, they would rather give them this port facility, which was out of nowhere, it's better to do that and then reschedule the whole debt. In Pakistan, you know, the port that they're building, Gwalior, is much more valuable. And I don't think that Pakistan would be ever be able to give that or give control or cede control of that port to Pakistan at all, because it's very strategically important. And you also realize that, you know, there's internally, even though Pakistan is one country, there are people, you know, they have the Pathanis, you know, out there, where they want to also have an independent state within Pakistan. So they're not going to do anything right now in Pakistan to do that. I don't think so.
Excuse me, there are several people with raised hands. I don't know what order you want to take can you see the raised hands? Roberta and Jerry
I don't have
Lareau.
any hands, so I don't know who is saying the hands. So I will leave it to Kirk to tell me, you know.
Mr. Martin. Kirk, can you see the
So
raised hands?
why don't you go ahead? I didn't notice any hands raised, but that's just because I'm not as familiar with this as other people are.
Roberta, do you want to, Robin, do you want to speak? I don't know who raised their hand first, but I'll just do that. Is that okay?
Thank you, Jocelyn. Yes, what I'd like to bring in here is the issue of China and its interest in keeping peace with Pakistan, despite the Belt and Road and the whatever Pakistan may owe China. China very much wants Pakistan to keep the Muslim insurgents, the people who would want to come into Xinjiang, which is the border there, from causing trouble. I mean, the border between China and Pakistan and India, just in the area where they're having, just near Jammu and Kashmir, contains both the Buddhist, the Dalai Lamas,
The Tibetan,
stronghold
yeah.
in the, no, not just Tibet, but Dharmashala.
Dharmashala, yeah.
Yeah, and I have a map, and I'll just try to show it to you. I'm holding my iPad because it has a camera, and I'm going to turn it towards my screen. But Hotan, which will appear on the screen in the north, let me try. Can you see that?
A
Yeah.
little bit.
Can you, okay, you see?
Yeah, you're in Afghanistan. You got to go further down. Yeah.
Whoops.
Right?
Right. How's that? Yes?
Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Better,
Dharmashala,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so you see where Hotan is. It's in the south of Xinjiang, which is the western, the western part of China, where they now have all the prison camps for the Uyghur. And then you see Darshamla, which I'm not pronouncing correctly. Iqbal, please.
Dharmashala.
Yeah, okay, that's where the Dalai Lama. I'm sorry, let me
What?
try again. Well, you got it, right? I can't. Did you see? They're 300 miles apart. And that's nothing. I mean, not that the Dalai Lama is in cahoots with the terrorists, who, whatever we want to call them, the Muslim activists, which certainly would have.
Uyghurs, you mean? You're talking about Uyghurs, right?
Uyghurs, no, because, well, the Uyghurs, though, would love to have some help from their
Muslim brother.
their brothers in all of the stands. And that, let me just go back to this map again. Hotan is in the south of Xinjiang, and it's where they've had the worst, the Chinese, starting maybe 10 years ago, had the worst, here, can you see it? Had
Yeah.
the very worst violence, whatever they, local Uyghur who are activists do, they bomb this or they do something else. And just north of that, I'm sorry, I can't control both things at once. Just north of Hotan to the west is Kashgar, which is the main town just before the border with Pakistan. And every Sunday morning, lots of people, Tajiks and Uzbeks and people like that, come across the border for a huge animal market. So it's a huge border, and the Chinese can't possibly control it. And yet, I think those two regions, Tibet and Xinjiang, make them more nervous than even Hong Kong in terms of their own security, where foreign groups or whatever could make a lot of trouble for them. And so India has, whatever, with the Dalai Lama, given him protection for years. I think the Chinese are probably less concerned with that than they are with Muslim activity, separatist activity in Xinjiang, because they have been terrible to the Uyghurs, terrible. They've taken all the natural resources out of there. They're charging the Uyghurs high prices. And now, because of the anti-Chinese feeling, they put them all in prison camps. And so it would seem to me that the US knows that China has a bigger interest in controlling separatist groups that would be active in protected by Pakistan, active in Afghanistan and Western China. And so the US would love to have Pakistan keep control of those groups. Pakistan, whatever its interest, it's China who really wants Pakistan to take control of those groups. So maybe China will forgive its debts to Pakistan, or Pakistan's debts to China. I don't know. But I think there's something going on in that area in terms of diplomacy. This, Kirk made a reference earlier to the Great Game replaying itself in the 21st century, where different powers have different interests. But this, it seems to me, is always under the radar. No one really talks about it. But it came up a couple of years ago at one of our great decisions issues, where we were talking about Pakistan and our concerns with Pakistan. And I'm thinking, why do we need to worry about it? China has the bigger problem. But that's all. That's enough for me. But when I looked at this map today, I was just struck. I thought the Tibetan, enclave in India where they were protecting the Dalai Lama was much further to the east, and it's not. It's right over in that area, and the border, it's a treacherous border, but we know that didn't stop anybody in Afghanistan from moving around when they wanted to. So that's it from me.
Iqbal, can I follow up and ask you a question? Why
Sure.
is the Pakistan military so protective and linked to the right-wing terrorist groups in Pakistan? Is it for political support? They want political support from them? Or why is it so hard for them to act to suppress terrorism?
Because, I think that it's the other way around. I would say that the military has always used this fringe, ultra-conservative Islamist for their own purpose. They use them, to go into Afghanistan. They use them in Kashmir for a number of years. So it is in their interest. So they have been controlling. If you look at even when we have a peace negotiation in Afghanistan, we're talking about, what is Pakistan's involvement in? Because Pakistani military, especially the intelligence service, ISI, is controlling all these various and sundry groups that are really trying to fight against the Islamist agenda. So they are doing it. Now, if you look at the way one of the big difference between India and Pakistan is, look at the schooling system. In India, it's sort of everybody more or less in the north and south, they still speak English, they learn English in the schools. And I was looking at some statistics from Pakistan. Pakistan has only 880,000 schools which teach English. There are 35 million students who go to schools where they don't learn except Urdu. And there are 3.5 million schools, which are only 3.5 million students who go to madrasas, where they only learn about Quran. And part of this is, the influence of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, with their supporting the madrasas and so forth. So the military, I think is dictating. It's not the other way around, in my opinion. Now, I may be wrong. I think the military is so powerful, they're controlling this, and they're just playing one against the other.
Did Jerry want to say something? I'm going to unmute Jerry LaRue. I'm trying to anyway. You're not unmuting. I'm sorry.
But Robin, the point
Oh,
that
there
you
you
made,
are.
and I'm just thinking out loud that if China is fearing the Muslims so much, then they would then be sort of more working with India, because India's policy right now is very much trying to put down everything that's Muslim in India, and that's a huge population. So I would have thought that they would play that card as well.
Jerry, I think you're unmuted now.
Okay. Iqbal, my concern is India is not really managing its economy to its own advantage. And that creates two problems. It's not able to punch in the political arena at the real way it could have if it let the economy grow. But it's not doing that. And it also means it's maintaining high levels of poverty. And the problem of growing for the economy of India revolves around every time a new company comes into India and announces it wants to do this or that, which would improve the economy, make it more efficient, bring lower prices to the Indian public. Local Indian business people, from the village level up to Mumbai, make a lot of noise and stop it. It doesn't happen. So the opportunities that would come from foreign investors really doesn't happen in any meaningful way to benefit the Indian public. And it's the outside world of investors are very disappointed. And by the way, the published numbers of India's growth rate from a few years back have been privately reviewed and lowered. The numbers were, we'll say, administered. So the growth rate they reported earlier wasn't even that good. What's the likelihood, Iqbal, of Moody allowing for change that would benefit India economically?
Well, you made a lot of comments, so I'm not responding to your comment, but just the question you asked. I think that, you see, one of the reasons Modi became to the national political scene, because what he had done in the state of Gujarat, where he was very instrumental in bringing foreign capital and foreign investment into the country. He cut down a lot of red tapes. He really did a lot of things for foreign investor. I think the Indian problem is not really foreign investment, because if you look at it, there are a lot of foreign investors coming in. If you just look at recently, this Jio, which is a telecommunication company, they've gotten billions of dollars, from all sorts of people, from Facebook to Abu Dhabi Investment Authority and so forth, and billions of dollars, which we have never seen before in the history of India. So investment is coming. The real problem in India are twofold, I think. One is that you have such a huge economy and such a huge population base. You have 1.3 trillion. You talk about 500 million people who are above the poverty line. Now you're talking about below that. If you take 1.3 billion people, and I'm saying, okay, give the credit that there will be 400 million people who are so-called middle class. So there still remains 900 million people. So the base is so huge that to create anything that you can, it's extremely difficult. So that's one problem. The red tapes definitely have been reduced, because they have the corruption starts when a lot of red tapes. The red tapes have been reduced. So if you want to do business now, it's much easier than it was when I first went and started the business. I had to wait almost 2 years, and I made probably more than, I would say, 12 trips to New Delhi to get a banking license, personally myself. And that's the way it was. I think right now it's much more simpler, but still it is there, and that's the government still is a huge employer. So what you going to do with all these people? They are using a lot of IT technology. Now there's a possibility, with what's happening between the United States and China in terms of trade, there are all sorts of people thinking that maybe some of the manufacturing should be really transferred from China into India, especially in somewhere in pharmaceuticals and others. So we don't know how this is going to pan out, but definitely India has a hard, very, very difficult road ahead of it. It's not very easy because the problem is massive.
I think,
and with coronavirus, it is going to be even worse,
Did Mr. Martin, Paul Martin have a comment?
Yes, I did. Yeah. Can you hear me? I hope. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So, okay. So we're talking U.S. foreign policy, and it's sort of interesting to me, for example, when we've had these many programs on the virus, how many of the speakers are in fact from South Asia. It's mostly India, I'm sure, but there's one or two from Pakistan, mostly doctors. So the sort of background then is the degree of intertwinedness between our economy and India, the flow of people. And then same thing with Pakistan, and the same thing with China. There are very complicated flows of business, not so much with Pakistan, but certainly with China and India. So the issue there, of course, is what is the role of diasporas? In other words, the Chinese, the Indian, and the Pakistan diaspora in Washington. I mean, I think that's the interesting question. And then the side question, of course, is, how competent is the State Department in dealing with these things? And, or is it just sort of lost in the morass of Trumpism?
Okay, so my first observation, I think the Indian diaspora in the United States is extremely powerful now. If you look at the political lobbies that are in terms of based on, so after the Jewish lobby, Indian lobby is the most powerful lobby in the Washington area. And you see that they're trying very hard to bring good relationship between India and United States. So that's sort of observation number one. Same thing happens to Pakistan. Pakistan. This all started, I think, after 9/11. That were, before, I think that people, Indian or people from South Asia, Indian subcontinent, were sort of apolitical. They came here, they really had a job, they were educating their family, they had a better life, and they didn't want to get involved in the politics. That has been Indian diaspora philosophy all around the world. I mean, our fathers and grandfathers grew up in Africa. They just go completely apolitical. They say, look, you're in business or you're in industry, you just do that, don't get involved in the politics. And the same thing was in the United States. It just started, I think, after 9/11, when people thought that, look, if you are looking different and you're somebody different, you may be in the same situation where other Asian Americans were in this country during the war. So you need to prepare yourself, you need to build yourself, you need to have influence somewhere in the political process in this country, because without that, it will be very difficult for you to function in this country. Even though you are a fully fledged American citizen, your faith is here in this country, and you believe in this country, but there are sections of our community in the United States which look at people of different color who may be citizens but in a different light. So I think that's the awareness that the diaspora has gotten, and therefore they're politically very active. And you put it out rightly. I mean, if you look at television, all the doctors, so many doctors and other things are all from subcontinents. It's amazing the number of people you see who are doctors or experts and so forth and so on.
Paul, if I could just respond to your comment about the State Department. I mean, I think kind of what you were hinting at is true, that areas of the world, well, first of all, I think the fact that we had a visit from Modi here in the United States and then Trump went to India, I think shows the power of the Indian diaspora, that Trump saw as important for him politically to do that. But on the other hand, I think that foreign policy under Trump has so been decided by whim and personal interest in getting reelected and everything else. I think that the State Department policymakers are mostly keeping their heads down and to see what happens in November, because having any kind of initiatives in the foreign policy area with Trump in the White House is very difficult unless they happen to be ones that line up with his self-interest in getting reelected.
Just one follow-up. In terms of the think tanks in Washington, are there any that sort of specialize on South Asia?
I don't know if there's some. I mean, all of them, for South Asia is an important area for all of them. And when you look at them, like Council of Foreign Relations, which is in New York, or Brookings, or things like that, they all do have experts in South Asia.
Robin, did you have a question?
No, I wanted just to answer Iqbal's remark about why the Chinese aren't feeling more inclined towards siding with India, because India is suppressing the Muslims horribly right now. My sense would be the Chinese have nothing against Muslims. I mean, the Hui, HUI, are Chinese, ethnic Chinese Muslims who've been there since the year 600. There have been mosques and Muslims in China. What China's worried about is the separatists in Xinjiang, because it's the West, it's where they have all their nuclear testing facilities, and it's rich. That area, whole area in the West is so rich with resources. And the Uyghurs are not ethnic Chinese. They're more Turkic peoples, I guess.
Yeah, Turkic, yeah.
And the fact is, I don't know if they're anti-Chinese on principle, or they're just anti-Chinese since China really has taken over that province. They, have moved in. There's a majority Han Chinese population now. They don't count it because a lot of them are demobilized servicemen whose registration comes from another province. But they've just taken over the whole province. And the Chinese, from their point of view, that Hotan, which I pointed out on the map, they've had terrorist activity there for at least 10 years or more. They finally cut that town off to travelers before I think Kashgar's probably restricted now, I don't know. But we were able to send groups there even 5 or 6 years ago, and it was safe. But the Chinese, I think, have just antagonized the Uyghurs so much. So their issue is with the radical groups in that area. And Pakistan is the one that has, for the reasons I guess you were explaining, Pakistani military has allowed these radical groups, has given them safe havens. So, so we have Afghanistan, which borders China right there too, doesn't it? Or at least it's close. I'm not sure where the border is. But China, this is such a dangerous area. And the Belt and Road's a whole different thing. On the other hand, it might give them a way to move troops out there eventually, but they can't take over that whole area. They have to do it differently. And they need Pakistan, but Pakistan isn't that strong.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Robert, I'm not quite sure whether Chinese are as innocent with regards to Muslims and with the Uyghurs as much, because I've seen one documentary which shows that the way they try to transform the communities in the mind is to bring a lot of people, Han people who come in, they make the local population a minority, especially in the Uyghur region,
yes,
close down the mosque, they can't wear their hats, they can't pray 5 times, they're in concentration camp, they're gone, and they tell them what they're not doing. There are some of the people who fled from there were now in Turkey. There are some interviews, but I think the last one I saw was on Frontline, which was really quite revealing that these Chinese are not just innocently trying to just assimilate them, because one of the Chinese policies that, listen, this area is underdeveloped considering other parts. So we're building these fast trains that goes to the area. We're bringing more industries and everything. But in the process, what they're doing is changing the whole social and economic structure of the whole region. Therefore, the people, they did less what Chinese did in Tibet. And the Tibetan people today, they are less Tibetan in Tibet than there were Tibetans when Dalai Lama left,
Right.
And you probably know that more.
No, I agree that completely. Yeah. I agree with that completely. But in both cases, it's like the Chinese reaction to the Catholics. If they feel their loyalties are outside of the Chinese sphere, then they're going to try to change the culture. I don't think they weren't closing mosques 6 years ago. They're closing them now, and they're worried about influence in what you call the sermons and what the imam might say. It's an identity separate from China, and you can't have an identity separate from Chinese. And Protestant Christians sometimes have that problem too, but Catholic Christians definitely do in China because they're worried about the Pope and outside. Anyway, that's enough for me, but I do feel China definitely has tremendous interest there in staying close to Pakistan. I don't think India can do much for China. I don't think they're going to send troops to help. The Indians aren't going to send troops to help the Dalai Lama, and the Dalai Lama isn't trying to retake Tibet at the moment. I don't think. I don't know. But anyway, it just seems, the whole area's a powder keg for China. That's what I would say. Enough from.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yes, absolutely.
No, was Angela, were you raising your hand?
Yes, I was. Shall I speak now?
Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt Robin.
Yes, sorry. Talking about identity, I lived in India for 5 years from 93 to 98 and traveled extensively for my work with part of the United Nations, the World Food Program. And I'm very curious if Iqbal can really say a bit about how Modi has gained his strength. I mean, we know how he started in Gujarat and the riots there, and also the economic success he had. And where does his strength really lie? I mean, I can remember when I was there that Bihar was very populist. There was also populism in Uttar Pradesh and other states. What groups is he really building on? And really what is the identity of India now is the more the Hindutva, the more Hindu
Hindutva, yeah.
focused, yeah, as opposed to the secular tradition, which was the difference between basically the Congress Party in India and,
Right.
and Pakistan at
Right.
partition. So I'd really appreciate some of your insight in this. Thank you very much.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that basically he's playing on these the young people in India, class that he thinks that he can mobilize in terms of trying to get them to believe in Hinduism and then create a nation state which will be Hindu. And that part of that was that it's sort of a backlash against what Congress Party did for many years. One of the things, if you really look at it today, that today's Modi government is saying that Nehru was the biggest destroyer of Indian entity as a nation. You read that, right? Because they believe that the Congress Party over the years, through whatever means they did, through secularism, they lost the identity of India. And why I think Modi has succeeded so far is that he has been able to instill this new identity for them. They're saying, look, you have to, as an Indian, you're first Hindu and then second Indian. You know what I mean? And you know, India, as you know, if you're going from up to down, you travel from the north to the south, they're different people. You know, now this kind of difference, even within South, is very different. You know, the number of political parties in the South is, you know, I think probably the last count when I was looking at the 2019 election, there was something like 25 different parties in the South. You know, in the opposed to the North, there are also more parties, but it's the nationalism that he has been able to build. And I think that Modi ran a very American presidential type election. In the past, you know, the prime minister was running, he never really was out canvassing so much as Modi did in 2014 and 2019. It was completely unbelievable what he has done. And so he has created this image that he is the person, Indian personality, which can bring India's identity back. And one of the biggest culprits of hindering him are the Muslims, who should be. Now, when I was in India last time in October, I talked to one guy who was really a very astute guy. I would say I have a lot of respect for him. And he said, listen, and he was talking about, you know, why India and Pakistan. I didn't mention that, but there's you know, Hussein Zakaria, who is the father of Fareed Zakaria, who appears on CNN. His father had written a book about Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Now, he being a Muslim, he said that the biggest mistake that Jinnah made was to create a separate state for Pakistan. Because what it has done, it has harmed Muslim people who went after a partition from India into Pakistan. They are still suffering in Karachi and suburbs. In Bangladesh, you know, all these people who went there and then after Bangladeshi war, they are still suffering to this day. And so there are lots of people in India and Pakistan saying, listen, that, you know, this partition was a big mistake, what it has done. And they're saying, some Indian people say, okay, you think that we do not like Muslims and, you know, the Indian-Pakistan problem that you have and you want to have Kashmir, have independence things. Okay, let's give everybody, you know, why don't we just come together, you know, and see if we can live together? Because if you want just to have a separate state, then take all the Muslims that are living today in India into Pakistan or wherever you want to have, which is right. You know, if you want to create a separate state in Jammu and Kashmir, then they say, okay, you want for Pakistan to have, then you take all the Muslims that are there in India and have them move to Pakistan, which would be a disaster. So you have two different things. So in one hand, I think there are many people who say it was a mistake, but it's happened. You cannot go back. So what's the best way to live? And I think that BJP and Modi really got to this idea of creating this very nationalistic thing. And, you know, that's the fashion all around the world. Look, they have a small base, very powerful, and they mobilize these people. And what Modi has done very successfully is to mobilize all these millions of Hindu people who are for him. I mean, look at the rallies that he has, like our president here and some other people in Turkey, and, you know, all these people who are doing it. In Philippines, you have the same issues, trying to separate people. So I don't know if I'm answering a question or not, but I think that his biggest attraction is that he brought this Hinduism in there. But what his downfall is that there were a by-election earlier part of this year in Maharashtra state where BJP didn't win. And so they had to make a coalition government. The coalition was going to be between Congress party and the local party. And finally, because the coronavirus came, this established an emergency, and then BJP appointed the chief minister. So, and there is another party around Delhi called Al-Mal Ali, which is a party which believes in stopping corruption. And in the Indian, and they won, something like 60% of the seats in Delhi. So I think there's a backlash coming. People are, whether they are from economic side or from political side or from religious side, that unless Modi really tries to do something which will be drastic and find some accommodation, he will have a very difficult time in getting the coalition again that he has been able to manage to mobilize the people in India. Answers your question, doesn't it? I think it's a very complicated thing. As the layman, all we can do is sort of see what I see.
If I could just say, yes, it does. Thank you so much. But how do you feel about the Dalit situation, the lower caste? Are they swept up in this as well?
Well, Dalit people, the so-called untouchables you're talking about, right? And Dalit, they have their own movement, because they also feel that their rights have not been quite, even though they are part of the constitution, but they have never been able to fulfill the rights that they have. And they have their own political movement. I think that the last count I was reading was 120 or 180 million Dalits, Dalits in India. I think it's 120 something. If I get the right number, because I was just reading recently. It's a huge number of things, and there's a movement that they're trying to create now, of a political movement, to see how they can capitalize on these people.
Iqbal, can I ask you about economics?
Yes.
Because when Modi first came in back in 2014?
2014.
Yeah, he there was a lot of economic success right in the beginning. And I guess, did he have more liberal policies than he does now? Because now I know he's put in place tariffs and he's opposed to liberalization it seems that he's opposed to liberalization of the economy now. So has he changed his economic policies?
No, I think he hasn't changed. But see, when he came in power, you remember that the party before that, there was a coalition of several parties, So it was very difficult to get anything done through the legislation process. Now, that's number one. Number two, you have two slates. Like our country, you have the national, the union government, and then you have the state governments. So, for example, if you want to go to invest into a state, let's say Gujarat or Karnataka in Bangalore, you go first through the local state. And once the state approves it, and in certain cases, it needs the union approval if there are certain industries which are restricted overall. So what he did, because from his example in Gujarat, where he really cut down all the red tape, in the beginning, he was very successful in doing that. And so the foreign investment poured in, and he got the benefit of it. And of course, the whole economy was growing up as well. China was at that time growing also faster than India, but India grew, and so did all the emerging markets. You look at Africa, how they grew. The African countries grew. Pakistan grew at 5%, which was unbelievable. So there was a growth all over the place. So, but he did benefit from the fact that he introduced some of these legislation which cut down the red tape, made it easier for foreign investors to come in and stabilize the market, so to speak.
And have his policies changed? Or because I've read how they've now established tariffs. Trump calls them the tariff king.
Yes, they have changed, but I don't know exactly how it has impacted the economy. I think the slowness of the economy was because of some of the policies he followed, has really backfired. And these were all domestic related policies. One was with regards to, if you remember, they changed the currency notes.
Yeah.
He reprinted in order to get out of the corruption. He said, okay, we're going to change the 500 rupee notes. Now, again, it was one of the things that was not well conceived, implemented completely in a haphazard way, so that the ATMs didn't work, the banknotes they couldn't do, and so that created a lot of people were dissatisfied, especially the middle and lower income people. So that was one. Then for the business community, he established what we call a value-added tax, a GST, and that has, again, was not implemented properly, and there's a lot of problem. And because as I know, I'm an investor in India, and it's still creating problems for up to this day. That it's not been clarified. So you're paying taxes, not knowing how much is going to be paid and how much you're not going to pay. So this created all this very uncertainty. And part of the thing that's because when you have complete mandate, you have a complete control of the parliament, you're able to pass whatever you want. There's no opposition. So he passed all this kind of thing, implemented very quickly, and then I found that they had a problem. So part of the economic problem is also this, that some of his economic policy didn't work very well.
I think we're
Yes,
kind of
sir.
getting to the point where we should start to wind up a little bit. Does anybody else have a question? Anybody who hasn't had a chance to talk yet? Okay, I see Roberta saying one more. Okay, Roberta,
Yeah,
you have a quick one?
Very quick. I just wanted to ask Iqbal, before the British, what were the relations between the Hindus and the Muslims? Were they better? I mean, before the British Raj? Or is that some new?
Well, see, before the British
revisionist-
Raj, immediately before that, you start
Yeah.
the Clive, you talk about the British coming in, Robert Clive coming and, getting involved into the period was, it was under the Mughal Empire. So it was traditionally Muslim, but they always had issue. The fall of the Mughal Empire, if you really look historically, was that it's not only that the British came, but the British were successful because the Mughal Empire also was falling. After Akbar died, who was the great Mughal emperor, his son Aurangzeb really became a very Islamist-minded. He started putting a lot of restrictions about what Muslims can do, what they cannot do. Well, Akbar incorporated every religion. He said, whether you are Muslim, Christian, Hindu, doesn't matter, Buddhist, you're part of the nation. When Aurangzeb started doing that, then you had the problem, started in Maharashtra and some other places where they started sort of fight against the Mughal Empire. And why Robert Clive was able to be successful, he was just a trader, but he had a small army and he was able to manipulate one against the other. And how they, divide and rule, and very successfully he was able to get them. So there was immediate, so it depends what time. During the Akbar's time, I think things were okay, but then as we went down to Aurangzeb's time after him, I think the situation was a little bit different because the Mughal policy was very, very pro-Islamist, and he tried to implement all these things.
Iqbal, thank you very much for having spent your time and enlightened us all.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
So, Jocelyn, you want to say when the next one is again? You're muted.
I always do that every time. The next one is July 9th, Thursday, July 9th. It's about the Red Sea, 6 p.m.
All right.
Thank you, Kirk. Thank you, Iqbal. This has been really fascinating. I've learned a lot tonight. I think everybody really enjoyed it, and we had a great crew. So I hope everybody's well, and we will see you on July 9th, if not before. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Iqbal.
Thank you.